Next week will mark the 4-year anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and the war continues on the front lines and in Ukraine's population centers. That's where Russia has ramped up its attacks on civilians and infrastructure, forcing hundreds of thousands to face extreme cold with very little heat and light. Meanwhile, peace talks continue, but strikingly, Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov are not the ones doing the negotiating. Instead, it's mainly Trump's businessman pal Steve Witkoff and Putin's money man Kirill Dmitriev. Anne Applebaum is here to shed some light on all of this for us. She is, of course, the Pulitzer Prize-winning historian and staff writer for The Atlantic. And first, tell us, what is this relentless attack on civilians about? It does seem like this is the big shift in Putin's strategy over the last 6 or 8 months.
So Putin is not winning on the front line. He takes a little bit of territory here and there. He loses a little bit here and there. But he's not able to break the Ukrainian front line, and instead has decided to destroy the Ukrainian power and energy infrastructure. I think with the goal both of demoralizing Ukrainians and also to demonstrate to his own people, to the Russians, to the Russian military, that he hasn't given up his major goal. And his major goal, I'm afraid, throughout all this and despite all the negotiations, his goal remains the conquest of Ukraine, the incorporation of Ukraine into Russia, the destruction of Ukraine as a nation and as a state.
And what do you make of Ukrainian morale? Because one does hear that there are voices saying we need to accept a deal. They say Zelensky is talking about a referendum. Well, what do you think is the mood among Ukrainians?
I mean, look, if you're living in Kiev and it's minus 20 below zero and you don't have heat or electricity, you really, really want the war to be over. So I can understand that Ukrainians are looking for some kind of trade-off. And actually, Zelensky has been saying for many months that he was ready to do that. The issue is that they can't end the war in such a way that it will restart immediately or that it will allow the Russians to, as I said, achieve their main goal, which is still the destruction of the country. Remember that Ukrainians are, when they fight, they're fighting for not just territory or land, they're fighting for their right to exist. They know that Russian occupation means that the police come in, they take over the cities, they kidnap mayors, they create concentration camps, and they can't allow that to happen to their country. So although they, I'm sure, desperately want the war to be over, they don't want to create a situation that will then be worse.
And what about these negotiations between Witkoff and Putin's money man? You hear some fantastic tales. Zelensky says that the Russians are offering a $12 trillion economic package. I don't even understand what that means, because Russia's GDP is $2.5 trillion. So this would be an economic package to America that is 5 times the total economy of Russia.
No, it's an absurd amount of money. And some of the deals that we've heard about that have been leaked from the conversations between Witkoff and Dmitriev are also pretty absurd. Look, the United States had been investing in Russia for many years, starting back in the 1990s. So we know what's available in Russia. We know what kind of deals are available. And all kinds of businessmen who've worked in Russia over the past decade have been saying, don't be swindled. They can't provide what they're offering. No deal in Russia is as good as you think it is. But unfortunately, Steve Witkoff is not somebody who has any experience with Russia or obviously any experience with diplomacy. And I do fear that he has an idea that there will be some kind of U.S.-Russia pact that he might benefit, or his son might benefit, or Trump's family might benefit, or that people around them will benefit. I mean, it's a really disturbing prospect, or it should be for all Americans, the idea that American foreign policy is being conducted by people who are not acting in the interest of the United States or of our allies or of world peace, but are really acting in the private interests of the people doing the negotiation. And of course, Putin knows that Trump is vulnerable to that kind of offer and that kind of deal, and that's why he's continuing to make those suggestions. I just hope that there are enough people in the White House who will be realistic enough to know to refuse it.
You've reported on Moscow for 25 years now. You were one of the first Western reporters to be there in the 90s when all of that kind of crazy capitalism and the oligarchs were going on. What is your sense of the deals that Witkoff might be being offered by Putin?
You know, Steve Witkoff and others in the Trump entourage are behaving very much like Russians. I mean, these are, you know, this is a manner of behavior that the Russians learned, that they learned that if you can capture the state, if you can use the state for your own private interests, you can become very wealthy. Anne
Applebaum, pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Next on GPS, AI is getting smarter by the day, but do we know how AI thinks? The answer may surprise you. That's up next.